Great, fantastic. Hope everybody enjoyed the breakouts. That's one of the, since we're not in person as more, we've heard feedback that those are helpful to at least get to network a little bit and talk healthcare. So hopefully those were beneficial. So thank you, Kate Merton from Anthem, for joining us here today. We really appreciate it. You know, what we're going to cover here in this interview is just a little bit of Kate's background and why she got into healthcare. We'll jump into her experience across multiple companies. You'll probably go deeper into Johnson & Johnson and Anthem. And the great things they're doing there around innovation, and then the lessons learned, and then close with some thoughts on just healthcare, entrepreneurship, and things that Kate has seen there. It could be good advice for all of us. So with that, we'll get going. Kate, we're excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So first, just to start off with an easy one, why did you decide to get into healthcare? I saw you have healthcare degrees, business degrees, but how did you decide that you wanted to get into the healthcare space?
Great. So number one, thank you so much for having me. I'm surprised anyone actually wants to ask me questions. My teenage daughter in the background thinks it's hilarious that anyone's actually interested in mum's background. But so just, I think like many people, I had a very personal reason for getting into healthcare. One of my parents was ill growing up, and I decided that I wanted to be a physician to try and cure what was wrong with him. It turned out I decided I wanted to become a pharmacologist so I could design a drug to cure my father of what he unfortunately passed away from. So I think many people share that drive, that's why they decide to dedicate their life and the education path that I went through to get that done.
Yeah, fantastic. Always those personal stories are so cool to connect to that. And so you mentioned you started wanting to be in the medical side as the doctor, and then you transitioned. People are on both sides of that sometimes. What made you make that transition in your mind?
So as you can hear, I'm not from this side of the pond. I'm from the UK, and the education system is slightly different. And I decided that in order to go beyond like helping the one person in my world, I wanted to help many. And I did a little bit of research and decided that designing a drug was the way to go. So I did my undergraduate degree in pharmacology. When I transferred over to the US, I did my PhD in the same thing so that I could then go get into a lab and actually design a drug to fix not just hopefully what was his issue, but like many others. And then from that, I think you find out, once you get more educated, you find out how ignorant you really are. And I realized that just designing the drug is not enough, and that you need to learn how to put it in a clinical trial, and you need to learn how to sell it, and you need to know how to talk to a payer. There was all this stuff I didn't know how to do. And so in order to help people like my parents, that's what then made me go to business school and take various jobs. So if people looked at my LinkedIn resume, they'd be like, wow, she's kind of schizophrenic, like she's been all over the place. But there was a real purpose to why I was doing it, because I was really committed to making sure that actually both of my parents got that drug in their hand at the end of the day. And if that meant I had to work in sales or marketing or work with payers, that's what I was going to do. So that's how I had my circuitous route to where I am today.
Yeah, well, tell me one more question on that before we move on to sort of J&J next. But like, that's an interesting point. Hey, you learned a little bit about sales, a little bit about marketing, because you realized, hey, if I want to be developing drugs and driving innovation, I need to learn more than just this tiny little part of it. Tell me more about how you were able to broaden your horizons there and how that's helped you in broader innovation.
So always been lucky enough to work with people far smarter than me. So when we discovered the drug for heart failure, I was like, well, that's awesome. Like, when does my dad get it? And they were like, well, it's got to go through trials. And I was like, don't know how to do those. So persuaded the company to pack me off and run some pivotal trials for diabetes, which was the disease my mum has, and was able to get that through FDA approval and all this kind of stuff, which is a wonderful experience I was sort of blessed with. And then after that, I was like, well, the drug's approved, like, now what happens? And they're like, yeah, well, you need to market it. You need to get someone to pay for it. You need to educate the patient why they want to take it. And so then I persuaded the Johnson & Johnson, the company I worked for, to let me loose in their marketing department. So I learned how to speak to customers, how to speak to a provider, how to speak to pharmacists, how to speak to the payer. And then they put me on other strategic projects, because it then enlightened me to the fact that a patient may get a prescription in their hand, but many of them actually get dumped in the trash can and they never make their way into CVS. So there is a lot of education. There's a lot of worry about how they're going to pay for it. And so what were the things I didn't understand? And that led me to work with our health economics group and payer group. So I truly understood what are the barriers of someone like my mom who gets given the prescription for the diabetes drug I got approved, what was going to stop her from walking into CVS or the English equivalent and walking out with her drug. So that's kind of all the different pieces I did. And I was really, really lucky to have that experience. I don't think many people get to do it. And then after getting all of that, I was like, well, helped my parents. So now I should probably pay that forward and help a bunch of other people that might need that knowledge, because it was a weird skill set. And that's how I ended up working in innovation with entrepreneurs.
Very cool. So yeah, I think that's always interesting just to see that with healthcare is different than other industries where you have to know not just the functional sales and marketing and finance and stuff, but also, hey, I'm talking to a payer versus a provider versus a patient versus a pharma company, right? Different languages and different skill sets. So that's
totally
cool.
Totally different language, because I know when I was working at JLabs with the entrepreneurs, like I'd have to delve into a scientific discussion about like the molecular weight of their molecule and how it interacted with receptors, and then the next second I'm talking to someone at Northwell about like how to get integrated into the IDN. It's like completely different kinds of conversations, right? And it's it can be tough, but it's a lot of fun, and super happy to help the entrepreneurs with that.
Yeah, great. Well, let's transition to that then. You mentioned Johnson & Johnson and JLabs and some of the innovation there. Maybe just for folks, give some context to that of what that is, what they were trying to accomplish with JLabs, and then we can go from there.
So J&J, one of the world's largest healthcare companies, has an innovation side to it, which helps serve the farm device and consumer parts of the business. So not just baby shampoo, they actually make it. The Janssen, their drug company, is the leading drug company in the world. And so what a very bright woman named Melinda Richter did was, a number of years ago, she set up JLabs, which is the innovation incubator arm of Johnson & Johnson's. And it was started down in San Diego, and some spare labs they actually had where I discovered the heart failure drug. There were labs next door that weren't used, and they opened up JLabs. And that then spread to other large hubs across the world. Literally, they're now in Shanghai, they're in Europe. And 2-3 years ago, I was asked to go to Manhattan and open up a 30,000 square foot incubator for entrepreneurs in farm device consumer. And I also took over the spots in Boston and Philadelphia. So essentially what JLabs does, it provides very cost efficient space, both the laboratories and desks, where entrepreneurs can come in, they can get mentoring from people within Johnson & Johnson, like how do you work with a large pharma company or device company. You also get educated through different speaker series that they have. And then they also had connections with venture capital groups. So Johnson & Johnson did not fund the companies that came to JLabs. That is a really clear distinction. They had no strings attached. So anyone who had like good science, had like a path, they thought they had a path to market, could come in, they would pay rent. That's why I'm kind of managed the P&L of the labs. And we tried to help them move forward. Now, some of them, about 25%, ended up with a financial relationship with J&J, but the other 75%, they were kind of on their own, and they made their business other ways. So it was an all-comer incubator.
Very cool. So how did you, couple of questions. I know there's probably a lot of entrepreneurs that talk about incubators and accelerators and try to get in. So coming from the other lens to these entrepreneurs, what were some of the things you were looking for in a company as they were coming in?
Right. So the first one, if you're a pharma device company, it's different from consumer. We want to know about your IP, or J&J would want to know about your IP. You need to have a strong position, because otherwise it's going to be tough. We wanted to know about the quality of the science. We wanted to know about the quality of the team. The team was incredibly important. You don't just want someone who thinks they've got a good idea, but has no idea to get out of the lab. You'll often find that a founder of a pharma startup is a really wonderful chief scientific officer, but not the world's best chief executive officer who actually can run the business. So we wanted to see what the business plan was like and where they were going. Also very interested in how they had raised their money. Like, quite frankly, what was the burn rate? Could they pay me rent for the next 6 months? And then what was going to happen after that? And then a key question was, why do you want to be at JLabs? Like, is it because you want the education? Is it because you want the connections? Because I think you have to be, when you run an incubator, you need to be responsible about making sure there's a good fit. Like, it is much better to give someone a quick no than a prolonged maybe. And if you invite them into an incubator, that is taking up an entrepreneur's time, potentially like the patent life they've got on their product. All this kind of stuff is a big decision. So we wanted to make sure that when I was at JLabs, we were the perfect fit for that entrepreneur, or should they really be somewhere else? And I would like to say that we had a very high bar. The number of applicants getting into sort of JLabs was high. The number that we actually accepted was pretty few. We were pretty strict, and depending upon the region, the acceptance rate would be kind of minimal, but it was good because it made sure that for the entrepreneurs that were in it, you got to mix with the people that were also held to the same high bar.
I love you're describing that sort of marriage and culture fit of those, because I think I've seen a lot of that, in our experience, through the Tech Village, Atlanta Ventures, and other places, is that there's lots of other programs for entrepreneurs to apply for out there. And there's I'll call it a big middle ground of applications where they all look interesting and there could be your stuff. And then there's some that clearly have spent no time at all looking at it, right? And automatically throw themselves out of the picture, even if they had a good idea. And then there's others that are noticeably different, that they spent the extra time to talk to a person or to read about another company in the JLab or something like that. Tell me more about like how you notice those great applications that stand out.
So for the people that were wanting to come in, they had truly understood what JLabs could offer them. So if it was like a farm startup, they already knew the operational capabilities that we could give them. They also had bothered to look at what J&J actually sold drugs in. So, okay, you happen to be an oncology company, you're interested in diabetes, that kind of stuff. So if it was a company that came and said, I want to be in JLabs, but I make a drug in an area that J&J has no idea what they're talking about, that means that number one, they didn't do their homework, which is not good, right? And number two, they're probably going to be wasting their time and our time. So it was someone who really did turn up prepared, not only about Johnson & Johnson, the other companies within JLabs, because we did actually see some startups start sort of merging with others. And that was a good thing. And someone who actually turned up with, unfortunately, there's some entrepreneurs that were like, well, if I come to JLabs, you're going to make me successful, right? And I'm like, no. I always described myself as the foster parent. I was there to be there for you when you needed me, but your success is upon your intrinsic ability and how much work you want to put into it. So if there were people who came and were just like, well, I'm here now, give me some business, I was like, no, it doesn't work that way. So it's people who also understood about the path to market, and the best applicants were the ones who asked lots of questions and asked me, what can you do for me? Like, is there anything I don't understand? That always really impressed me. And then the last one is probably if they had advisors to the company, they'd actually bother to go and find out who was like the person in the space that could really get them somewhere. That helped a lot because that increases our network too. And this is business and you want to grow in various ways.
Yeah, I like that. So I think big takeaway there for entrepreneurs, rather than just applying across the board to a bunch of things and hoping something sticks, do the research. And not only will it help you focus your time to being successful in the right place, but it'll give you that much more chance of getting funding, getting acceptance to an incubator, whatever it may be. Great stuff, Kate. So let me transition now a little bit to Anthem. Mm-hmm. Now, some of the great stuff that Anthem's been doing, building new buildings, jobs coming to Atlanta, the new digital incubator and sandbox, a lot of things. So maybe just give folks the quick context of all the things that Anthem is doing right now in Atlanta and beyond.
Sure, happy to. So I think that is a good bridge for like, why did I go from JLabs to Anthem? I got given the responsibility for the global health tech program. So although I'm a pharmacologist by training, I got very interested in digital health, and everything digital came through me. And I ended up having, every entrepreneur, the first question I ended up having was, have you spoken to a payer yet? The next one was, did you actually speak to a provider and an IDN? But the first question was, have you spoken to a payer? And they would be like, why would I want to do that? And I was like, well, because they're probably the people that are going to pay you for what you're developing. So through personal relationships, a friend of mine, Morris Bakari, who's now my boss, he was at Apple and we were chatting and he was going to make the transition to Anthem. And he said, hey, if you got to design a digital health incubator just for digital health, what would you do? And I was like, oh, I'd want to do this and I'd want to do this. And it should be with a payer. And he was like, well, guess what? I'm going to Anthem. So that is the opportunity that was kind of put before me. And a few weeks ago now, we opened the Anthem Digital Incubator, which is an invite-only incubator for people with digital health startups who have proven and shown us that they can answer one of our opportunities or problems. So I like to say, help us meet the need of something that's keeping us awake at night. So the incubator is only for the entrepreneurs where they've already shown that they have a product that can meet one of our needs that needs to be executed upon in the next 18 months. And in return for that, they will actually get funding. So unlike JLabs, there are strings attached. You will come in, you will get funding for a pilot. There will often be an equity structure also associated with that. You will also get the mentoring, but in a more targeted way. So the most valuable thing I saw at JLabs was the mentoring. And here and now at ADI, at Anthem, we're actually assigning each of the entrepreneurs a navigator, which means they would spend time talking to me, truly understand what it is that that company needs to grow and who are the specific people along their success pathway they need to get to know. And we will have someone take them by the hand and lead them through those conversations to try and speed up the process. They'll also get the appropriate education that you would expect in an incubator, like how do payers really work? Who do you really need to talk to? How do you, they'll have to go through pitch prep with me, unfortunately, how to get your point across in 1 minute or less. So all the normal stuff, but it's a really highly curated process. The ways to get into that are just sort of reaching out to people like me understanding what your company is doing and me seeing if it's a fit with something we've got going on. And then also we're going to be running the obligatory challenges where we know what our problem is. We're going to put out an RFP for it. And within 3 months, we want to gather the best and the brightest that can actually answer that problem for us. And then last but not least, one of the things that Warris and I were talking about before we started ADI was the Entrepreneur in Residence program, which Kyle, who's also on this call, he leads that for Anthem. That's where we have experienced healthcare leaders come in to Anthem. They are paid very well for a consulting period to actually deliver on a product or project that we need. And during that time, it gives them a chance to get to know Anthem, where, you know, there might be some gaps in our portfolio. And at the end of like a 6-month period, they get to propose to us, hey, I want to do a startup in this area. Anthem will have some equity in it and I need you to fund it, you know, in a sizable amount, something that we could get a startup of going. So the digital incubator is invite only. There's various ways to get into it, either a small company or say one that needs more funding, one that's come through the Entrepreneur in Residence program. And we are looking forward to having more companies come in. At the moment, we have 1 fully funded, 2 more I anticipate being funded in the next couple of months, but it's a much smaller scale to JLabs. And that's because I have found that giving guardrails to entrepreneurs and really giving them the problem to start with is far more efficient than them giving me a solution and me trying to retrofit it to a problem I need to go find.
I love that. So many good follow-up questions coming here, Kate. I love how you set that up. Let me start with what you just finished with right there. Starting with a problem versus starting with an idea. Oftentimes I see entrepreneurs struggle because they say, I've got this cool technology or I've got this cool thing over here. And then they go try and find a problem to fit it to versus starting with the problem first. Tell me more about that mentality of starting with the problem.
So it kind of started at JLabs, and that's how kind of like some parts of ADI were developed. When we were running the health tech program there, I was lucky enough to have to be posted in a sales organization, and there is no better way to truly understand the pain points than have to be someone who has to try and sell and like manage a forecast and meet a P&L. And I ended up having all the presidents of Janssen come in and tell all the entrepreneurs, reverse pitching, and we were just talking about that in a breakout, like what kept them awake at night. And it was amazing what keeps the presidents who own the billion-dollar forecasts awake at night. It is not what you think it is. It is actually some small like roadblock which is stopping them from getting a count and doing something else. And it's amazing how technology could easily do that. So the presidents who, you know, are used to running a commercial team didn't realize the resources we had in the incubator, and that there were entrepreneurs right there who could say, well, I've got this product, but if I turn it a bit by like 90 degrees, it's not exactly what I do now, but I tweak it enough, it is going to solve that person who owns the billion-dollar forecast. It's going to solve their problem. And oh my goodness, you're going to be the flavor of the month. So it was amazing how having the business leaders come in and say what their problem was helped the entrepreneurs realize, I've got a wonderful product, but I just might need to tweak it. So that's exactly what we've done in Anthem. We are going out to the different lines of business, whether it's commercial, government, house account, and saying, what is it that you need doing? Because you're going to educate us. And then beyond that, because Anthem has relationships with large employers, we can also go to the employers and say, what is it that you want for your colleagues? Bring that back and tell the entrepreneur. And it just, I think it decreases disappointment on many sides. Like you, as I said before, a quick no is much better than a prolonged maybe. And if I can actually give you the problem right at the beginning, there shouldn't be any no's. You should be like, okay, I'm on that. I'm going to take my technology and apply it this way. Doesn't mean you can't go do your grander plan, but you need to like get one thing done first, make some revenue, and then build from there. I hope that's what you wanted to know.
Yes, no, I love that. I mean, we're big believers in the start with the problem first as you go to build a business. So I love that. So now let me just ask a couple of just clarifying questions on the scope, right? Because you mentioned digital health, which if you probably talk to 10 people, you may get different answers of what's included in digital health.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about the problems and how you define those. I'll come back to that in a second. But digital health, how do you define what's in the scope of digital health?
So digital health can be everything from, you know, my mother trying to track her steps with the app, which never works, right? She doesn't know what she's doing, to virtual health, which is that gap between seeing a patient in person and my mother with her app, which is like, how do you support someone with hypertension with a virtual program? So even though they're not being tracked every day by the nurse, they're actually staying on course. So I'd say it's wellness, it's virtual health, and then it also is the digitization of processes that already exist, even in person. So if a physician is sitting in front of you, literally across the desk, and they're writing within an EHR of like the notes of what's going on with Marianne, are they getting real-time feedback of whether has been checked for various other things which are going to help that physician meet the stars rating? So it goes from the sublime to the ridiculous. It can go from like wellness, which is low touch, virtual, high touch, wanting to be accountable for the value you get out of it, to how do you actually help a provider be more efficient in what they need to do on a daily basis. So it really is a lot, and we're actually interested in all parts of that. So it sounds a lot, but we are interested in all pieces.
Cool. And then as you mentioned, defining the problems and putting out RFPs around the problems to get entrepreneurs, like tactically, what's the frequency of that, and how would entrepreneurs get access to that to learn how to solve some of those problems?
Great question. So the frequency of the challenges is going to be once a quarter. I know you and I have also been talking about other things that we could do that are a little bit more regionally focused as well. Super open to doing that. One way to go and find out what's going on is going to the Anthem.ai website. That's where you can find out more about the incubator and the challenges and sort of how to connect with people such as myself. And we also will be, now we're ramping up, despite COVID, we'll be attending more sort of virtual events, and you'll be hearing more from me and the rest of my team.
Great. And then another part of that, I had heard about the sandbox concept with the vast amount of claims and stuff you have coming in. Maybe talk a little more about what that is and how that would work.
Great point. Thanks for reminding me. So when I was chatting with Warris about what is one of the things that the entrepreneurs miss, they miss that opportunity to fine tune their product. So often in the digital health world, it's based upon an algorithm. Everyone's using that word at the moment. How do you fine tune your algorithm to actually make sure it works? That means having access to de-identified data that you can run it through and make sure it does what it says it will, or you can even improve it for a said demographic. So Anthem has our data sandbox, which is a large body of data which has been de-identified, which we make available to entrepreneurs when they come into the incubator and for certain pilots that they work with. So the incubator is kind of unique in that we pick you, we give you a problem to work on and a path to market. We actually pay you and we give you the data to improve what you're already working on. It's kind of like my nirvana of what an incubator should be, giving someone the data, giving money to do the job, and then giving them a path to market.
Fantastic. That sounds exciting. I'm going to guess you're going to have a lot of folks interested in getting involved with something like that.
Yeah, I hope so.
So Kate, we probably got five minutes here, and then we'll go to Q&A. So folks, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat so we can answer those at the end. So you've seen sort of the corporate innovation and then like the innovation specific groups, and you also work with entrepreneurs, a lot of exposure. Like, how do those different, and what are some lessons learned about how to navigate the interplay of all those?
That's a really good question. And I think it kind of comes down to how you navigate in business. You will find large corporations, I'm just being totally transparent because that's the only way I roll. They say they're innovative. And when you ask them what they mean, they're like, not sure. And when you try and get them to have a conversation with an entrepreneur, they're almost scared. And that is because people speak different languages. And I think the role of incubators and people like me is to make sure that you decrease the barriers to entry of just speaking to the people in large corporations, because they desperately want to change and they want to get out of it being 1995. But there is a fear because they need to meet numbers, they need to meet forecasts, and they need to keep their jobs. So how is the way that we can balance that? I know everyone talks about innovation being disruptive. I personally believe that incremental innovation is sometimes far more impactful than you wanting to be disruptive. Because if you go to disrupt, you're going to scare people, and it's going to be hard for them to get on board. Why the most functional way I've seen it work is when people seriously do take that servant leader approach. They are here to serve. They try and understand what the problem is, and then they meet one quick need first. That's like in Johnson & Johnson, huge organization. The organization was like, please don't touch me because I'm working really well. I don't want these innovators coming like messing things up for me. And that I've seen it happen at Pfizer. You see it at Novartis, at J&J, and even at Anthem. And so we need to do a better job of helping the entrepreneurs speak to the corporate in a way that they don't find threatening and they hear that they are serving a need that they have. I hope that helps.
No, I like that, sort of hearing it in a different way, that sort of servant of solving their problem first, and then you can get to your bigger vision. Because if you can't solve their problem first, it's going to be hard to get in. So what common mistakes do you see entrepreneurs make going through that process that sort of get them turned off from getting that first pilot or that first, whatever?
My favorite is when you ask them, who are the competitors in the area? And they're like, no, I'm unique. And I'm like, no, your mom probably told you that, but that's not true, because you've just told me two things. Number one, you didn't do the background, because I guarantee you're not unique. You should have done some research. And number two, you didn't prep for that very obvious question. Like, they're not realistic. So never say that you have no competition, because even if there are a couple of times when someone has been pretty unique, they've said, I do this, but the closest corollary may be, right? So always do that one. Always come in with realistic expectations. The best question is when someone comes in is like, I have this great technology and I would really like to understand what opportunities, don't say the word problem, what opportunities you might have for someone like me to able to sort of enable you meet your goals. So literally coming in with a certain, I've got a great technology. So you've already kind of said, I've got something you want, but preface it as, please tell me what's going on in your world. I'd like to help you. Tell me how you want that done. That is the biggest tips. And then the other thing that doesn't work very well is, apart from saying you've got no competitors, is not understanding or like everything that you literally have. Like if you go and do a pitch and you're the CEO, but you don't know all the tech, make sure you bring the tech person with you. There is nothing worse than getting to pitch, someone asking you a question, you're going, I don't know that. So it's better to have a few more people on the line, especially in this virtual world, ready to jump in and answer the question, than saying, I don't know what I'm talking about.
No, I like that. I think a key theme that I see and what I'm hearing from you too, right, is that too often I see entrepreneurs come in and spend 95% of the time talking about themselves and their solution versus actually listening and asking good questions like you were saying before.
Yeah, it's all psychology. It's all psychology. You get greatest traction with someone when you help them solve a problem they have. Don't give them something they think they want. It's actually been proven. You ask someone something that's worrying them, and if you meet their need, you're going to do a lot better. It really comes down to that. Having the technology is just like buying to the poker game, to be honest. So yeah, I don't want to hear all about the bells and whistles. I want you to ask me what's up.
I love that. Well, great stuff, Kate. I know a lot of good questions are coming in here. So I got about 10 minutes to transition to some Q&A. But any last thoughts before we go to Q&A? Kate, anything else you wanted to share?
I want to kind of put out there, like you and I have discussed, that I am still very well aware that I'm usually the most ignorant person in the room. And like I asked when I was in the breakout, I was like, what's going on in Atlanta that I need to understand or know about? And I would really there's always a better way to do innovation. And just because I'm in a payer, there's still the provider, there's the network, and there's the patient. And can we come up with a way where we can all work together instead of like one person developing it and then trying to push it out? It will be difficult, I know that, but can like more groups to come together and try and come up with a solution the first time out. There has got to be a way to do this. We are evolving in the way we do innovation, and I would love to hear from people what they think, and they educate me.
Fantastic. Well, Kate, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. JC, I'll flip it over to you now. I know a lot of questions are coming in through the chat.
And get to most of them, but we will see. This one was exciting just because you're on that customer side of things, or that like the entrepreneur side of things. What is your advice to acquire that first customer for an entrepreneur? How do they go about getting that first customer?
So the first customer being like a payer or an IDN, something like that. Attend things like this, network as much as possible, and understand where the first gap is going to be. So if you see something like COVID come along, you know that maybe there's going to be a loosening in the way that we pay for things, and there is a quick near-term need. Start small. Don't like suddenly reach for Anthem. Is there a regional network which you can actually prove that you can get the job done? Okay, because if you can decrease the number of conversations you have in order to get to market, that's good. The bigger you go, the more conversations, the more roadblocks there will be. Start smaller, try and get something done regionally, prove that you can operationalize something, then you worry about scale, and then you go to the bigger groups.
Oh, awesome. Now, one question here, I think it may be like a clarifying question. Are you thinking about covering like the mental health and emotional side of like some emotional support for patients as well when you guys are, thinking through problems?
Absolutely. So behavioral health is one of 4 big columns of work that I think about on a daily basis, because I think we will understand that someone's behavioral health actually underlines nearly everything else going on. So whether it is helping people with the current situation with COVID and being isolated, whether it's students dealing with the issues that they have, maybe it's elderly, whatever it is, that is a big deal to us. And we're literally refining our behavioral health strategy right now, and the vendors or startups that we're going to be working with. I mentioned that we have one company fully funded within the Incubator, and it happens to be a behavioral health app, which helps people while they're at home dealing with situations.
Awesome. That's great. I'll get a few COVID questions in here now. I've got a question. What is your opinion on the COVID vaccine and whether they rushed trials? Are they compromising the patient's safety, etc.?
Oh, that's an interesting one for me, because I used to run clinical trials, although in the area of diabetes. I would say there is no such thing as rushing a clinical trial. Now, if you trust the FDA and the powers that be, there are very clear pathways that you have to go through to get a trial started to show that you're using the right number of patients for power and that you get a significant difference. Now, what I just said is, if you trust the powers that be, then I would trust that the clinical trials have been done appropriately, especially the companies that I know that are involved, such as Janssen. Obviously, I know them pretty familiar, and the others. I think it's being done well. Now, is the recruitment as strict as it could be? I think that's up for debate, but I would absolutely trust the data that comes out of it, especially out of the large pharma companies, because they have a reputation they are not going to want to put on the line and do something wrong. So
Okay.
that's my outcome on that one.
Another one kind of similar, but along with the COVID, in this COVID telemed world, how do you see the use of PAs to bridge the virtual hands-on gap in the future, like post kind of COVID telemed world? Telemed.
By PA, just to confirm, you mean physician assistant?
I believe so. That was my assumption.
Yeah. I actually personally believe that there is going to be a change in the way that we have healthcare professionals in the future. Like, we are very much used to going to a PCP or a GP, and now we have physician's assistants, we have nurse practitioners. And I think there's going to be an evolution of that. There's also going to be what we call like a healthcare quarterback in the future, who isn't necessarily the physician, but he's someone who's very well versed in what's going on with you and your situation. And right now, I think physician's assistants play that role very well, and I can only see their role increasing. So getting their perspective as we develop digital health tools, or those that enable virtual health management, is going to be very important, because they are one of the stakeholders that are going to influence what works, what doesn't work, and how you communicate to the patient. So very important, their perspective. And I see things only getting busier for them.
Okay, well, speaking of busyness, and you've mentioned incremental progression. So how, of course, how has COVID affected budgets for manufacturing and hospitals to spend on all of this new offerings for startups? Do you think that's going to be, still pertaining to that incremental progression? How do you see that affecting it?
Yeah. So what I was mentioning was that incremental innovation versus disruptive is, I have seen, be far more effective, especially when you're working with large corporations who are risk averse. I actually think the current funding for startups has not completely dried up. Now, are they probably curating things a little bit more in detail, right? Because they've got to be careful with money. Yes. But I think that's only a good thing for incremental innovation, because they're going to make bets on things that can near term deliver. There is still funding available for startups working in the virtual and digital health world that can show that they can have impact in the next 12 months and actually deliver value. And by that, I mean, not just say that they've helped someone's outcome, they've actually got a measured outcome. They have shown a significant difference in something. So something that doesn't necessarily need a clinical trial, but they've actually done the next step to make sure they can get the data. There is still money available for virtual health companies that can show that they've proven there's been a value increase.
Awesome. Okay. Now, I wanted to go back real quick to the buckets you mentioned. You said one of them was the mental health component. Can you share the other three?
Yeah, absolutely. They're probably not too much different from many other large companies. So it's going to be primary care. One of the issues with COVID is, like, initially everyone was worried about, oh, can I get a COVID test? What they weren't worried about is the fact that people who have primary care needs, or chronic condition needs, or behavioral health needs, or diagnostic needs, they weren't getting that done. You have like what they call the dying well. So just because you happen to be okay, it means that you didn't get your a mammogram or your pap smear or something, and that means you're eventually going to be sicker because you've been lost, right? So we are very much interested in chronic care conditions, how we can help them be managed virtually, diagnostics of people getting screened when they should be, behavioral health we already covered, and then primary care, because some virtual health visit for me and my 3 children, when I want them to be seen, that's fine for me. But you will also find that some people are not comfortable with that. So we're very much interested in making that more feasible for sort of older generations as well, and also making sure that we can help the physician have the appropriate follow-up and keep tabs on patients. So those are the 4 areas: diagnostic, chronic care, behavioral health, and primary care.
Okay.
I love that. JC, maybe one more
Yeah.
question and we'll wrap up.
I'm trying to pare them
So many
down.
good ones.
I really do think I'd love to know, like, what is an area of healthcare that's not being looked at by, and that like entrepreneurs could help solve right now, the problems that you think that of those 4 is one priority, or is there an area that's not really been talked about?
I think they're all being looked into. I think you'd be hard pressed to find an area that an entrepreneur is not looking into. I personally would say the area of behavioral health, like the time is now, because we are all in isolation. We are all experiencing different situations that we never would have been subjected to before. So if you were ever going to try and get a behavioral health app or something out, like now is the fertile ground to do it. It's just, to me, it's kind of obvious. And we've seen that people's behavioral health impacts chronic health. It impacts why they're going to see a primary care physician. So that is the one that if I was about to do a startup right now, that's probably where I would be putting my time and my money.
Awesome. Thanks so much. AT, if you want to kind of wrap us up then.
Sure. Well, Kate, thank you so much again for answering all those. Let me just highlight a couple upcoming events that we're going to have here and wrap up. And as always, you can go to our website at atlantaventures.com. We have a healthcare tab there where you can see upcoming area healthcare events, our next meetups, and other companies in the Atlanta area as well. So if you look, just some upcoming events that are coming up, some conferences coming up, and Georgia HIMSS, Georgia Bio, Tag Digital Health, all have events coming up. You can see here and go to their respective websites. 2 other ones I'll highlight: the Georgia Healthcare Innovation Challenge, where we're working with Navicent Health and some of these other organizations on the reverse pitch. So similar to what Kate was describing, starting with a problem. We already did the reverse pitch back in July. The forward pitch, where the companies who were selected to participate and propose to solve those problems are presenting, is coming up here at the end of October. And that event is open to folks there. And then our next Healthcare Entrepreneur Meetup is going to be December 9th. With Angela Fusara from Physician 360 here locally, physician who started a telemedicine type platform. So with that, again, I just love to wrap up, and thanks again to Kate and all her great insights today and her time. We really appreciate it. Lots of good lessons learned in there for entrepreneurs and folks. And Kate, we look forward to seeing all the great things that you're doing with the Incubator and here in Atlanta.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.